Question. You're recording data on your learner's self-hitting. You identify that he hit 6 times in a 2-hour session, so you record the data as 3x per hour. Which type of measurement did you use? Rate. Correct. You recorded self-hitting using a rate measurement. Rate is the number of times a behavior occurred over a specified time period. Question. When recording data on a line graph, on which axis would you put the date? X-axis. The x-axis is the horizontal axis on a graph, where you record the date or a session number. The y-axis is the vertical axis on the graph, where you record a measure of the behavior. Question. Your supervisor asks you to take duration data on your learner's behavior. What does this mean? Recording the total amount of time your learner engages in a behavior. Duration data records the total amount of time the behavior lasts. If your learner engages in a target behavior of screaming from 12:08 to 12:10, then the duration you record is 2 minutes. Opening parenthesis dash closing parenthesis. Question. Response latency is to blank as whole interval recording is to blank. Continuous measurement, discontinuous measurement. Response latency is a type of continuous measurement, as you record every occurrence of the behavior. Whole interval recording is a type of discontinuous measurement, as you record specified instances of the behavior, rather than every occurrence. Question. Julio records interval data for his students' classroom participation using 5-minute intervals. During the interval from 8 o'clock to 8:05 a.m., student A participates in the class work for 2 minutes. Julio records that interval as a or yes plus. Assuming he is entering data accurately, what type of measurement procedure must he be using? Partial interval recording. Since Julio records the behavior as occurring for the 5-minute interval, even though student A only participated for 2 minutes within that interval, he must be recording partial interval data. In partial interval recording, you mark each interval as occurring if the individual demonstrated the behavior for any portion of the interval. Question. Which of the following is an objective and measurable description of behavior? Harriet punched her friend's face with a closed fist. Harriet punched her friend with a closed fist is objective and measurable. Mean is a subjective term which should always be left out of descriptions of behavior in ABA. Additionally, aggressive is not clear, so it would be difficult to measure. Behaviors that some might consider as aggressive may not be seen as aggressive by others. Clearly describing her behavior as a closed fist punch to the face is both objective and measurable. Question. What is the red arrow pointing to in this graph of client ABC's spitting? The y-axis. The red arrow is pointing to the y-axis, where the measure of the behavior is recorded. Question. Milana wants to know how much time passes between occurrences of her client asking for a break. What type of data would she collect? Interresponse time. She would record interresponse time. Interresponse time tracks the time from the end of one response to the start of the next. For example, if her client asked for a break at 3:13, then again asked for a break at 3:26, then 13 minutes would be the interresponse time. Question. You want to make changes to your own behavior to be healthier. You begin by self-monitoring how often you exercise. During week 1, you record exercising 3x per week in 90 minutes total. What types of measurement did you use? Duration and rate. You used both duration and rate to record your exercise. 3x per week represents rate data, number of occurrences over a specified time period, and 90 minutes total represents duration data, the total amount of time. Question. Operational definitions of behavior should be objective. Operational definitions of behavior should always be objective. This means they describe only what can be observed and measured, leaving out assumptions, thoughts, opinions, and feelings. Question. Marley's mother gives her a cup of orange juice. Marley throws the cup and screams. Marley's mother says, "What's wrong? You asked for orange juice." What was the antecedent in this scenario? Marley's mother providing a cup of orange juice. The antecedent is what comes immediately before a behavior. In this situation, Marley's mother giving her a cup of orange juice was the antecedent. Question. Which of the following is true about a free operant preference assessment? You observe your learner in a natural setting and record what they choose to play with. A free operant preference assessment does not involve interference from the assessor. In this assessment, You observe your learner in their natural environment and record information about what they choose to play with and how long they engage with each activity or item. Question. Your BCBA provides your client's caregiver with a questionnaire to fill out about the child's behavior to get more information about what they're seeing outside of therapy sessions. This type of tool falls under which category of assessments? Indirect assessment. Checklists, questionnaires, and interviews are indirect assessments. These are ways of gathering information about an individual's behavior without directly observing the behavior of interest. Question. Which of the following describes a multiple stimulus with replacement MSW preference assessment? Lorraine places 6 toys in an array and records which toy her learner chooses. She allows them to play with it for a minute before taking it away and changing the array with new toys. In an MSW preference assessment, the therapist places an array of items in front of the learner and instructs them to choose one. After allowing them to play with it for a short time, they remove the item, put it back in the array and replace the non-chosen items with new items. Question. What is the purpose of a preference assessment? To identify items and activities that are reinforcing to an individual. A preference assessment aims to identify items and activities that your learner enjoys or prefers, and which are likely reinforcing. It is different than a reinforcer assessment in that preference assessments can't actually tell us whether the item is reinforcing. However, it can give us an idea of what the person enjoys, which may lead us to identify potential reinforcers and find ways to enrich sessions. Question. Your BCBA asks you to help him conduct a skill-based assessment, e.g., VB-MAP, ABLLS, with your shared client. Which of the following best describes how you would conduct the assessment? Provide the instruction for the skill, allow your learner to respond, and record data on their response. When probing skills, such as in a skill-based assessment, you provide the instruction, allow your learner to respond, and record data. Since you are not teaching the skill during an assessment, you do not prompt the correct response, go through error correction, or provide reinforcement for correct responding. Question. In what type of assessment would you record ABC data? Descriptive assessment. A descriptive assessment is one component of a functional behavior assessment, FBA. Descriptive assessments consist of observing a target behavior directly and taking data on it. You can do this by taking ABC data, recording the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Question. How many items are presented in a paired choice preference assessment? 2. In a paired choice preference assessment, 2 items are presented, allowing the learner to choose one. Question. When recording ABC data, what information must be recorded? Choose the best response. What occurred right before the behavior, what the behavior looked like, and what happened right after the behavior. ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, consequence. When recording ABC data, you record what the antecedent was, what happened right before the behavior, what the behavior looked like, and the consequence, what happened directly after the behavior. Question. What is a baseline measure? A measurement of the behavior or skill before implementation of the intervention. Baseline measures are data collected on a behavior or skill prior to implementing an intervention. These are used to identify a starting point for the goal and to monitor progress. Test 2. Question. JC has a goal to independently monitor for preferred items. Which of the following would be the most precise mastery criteria for this goal? 80% independent across 3 consecutive sessions. A goal's mastery criteria describes exactly what needs to occur for the goal to be met or mastered. Since this goal is independence, setting a percentage of opportunities makes the most sense. In addition, mastery criteria must specify how many repetitions need to be demonstrated to show mastery. Typically, this will be at least 3. In other words, the mastery criteria will specify that the predetermined criteria must be achieved across X sessions days. Question. Sheila is working with a 3-year-old boy. He enjoys playing with toy dinosaurs, so she brings a bag full of toy dinosaurs to her session and allows him to play with them when he earns 5 tokens for following his rules. Toy dinosaurs would be a conditioned reinforcer. Toy dinosaurs would be conditioned reinforcers. These are things that become reinforcing through pairing. Unlike unconditioned primary reinforcers, toy dinosaurs are not innately reinforcing to humans. Question. Your BCBA reviews a new goal with you. They instruct you to use a continuous schedule of reinforcement for this goal. What does this mean? You reinforce every occurrence of the behavior. A continuous schedule of reinforcement means you reinforce every occurrence of the target behavior. Question. Your favorite ice cream spot offers punch cards where you can earn a free scoop of ice cream. Each purchase earns you 1 punch on the punch card. Once you receive 5 punches on your card, you get your next scoop free. What schedule of reinforcement would this exemplify? Fixed ratio. This is a fixed ratio schedule, where reinforcement is provided after a set number of responses. Question. Blank reinforcement occurs when a reinforcer is presented regardless of whether the target behavior is demonstrated or not. Non-contingent. Non-contingent reinforcement (NCR) consists of providing reinforcers independent of the target behavior. In other words, the individual does not need to earn the reinforcement. Question. Which of the following is not included in a written skill acquisition plan? A description of the behaviors targeted for reduction. A skill acquisition plan is a document that outlines procedures for teaching a new skill. Behaviors targeted for reduction generally wouldn't be included in this plan and would rather be included in a behavior reduction plan, behavior intervention plan. Question. Which schedule of reinforcement is used when reinforcement is provided after an average amount of time has passed? Variable interval. A variable interval schedule of reinforcement occurs when reinforcement is provided after a varied amount of time. Variable is varied, average, changing. Interval is time-based. Question. You are running discrete trial teaching to teach your learner a new skill of identifying emotions exhibited on 2D picture cards. You hold up a picture card of a girl smiling and ask, "How does she feel?" At what point would you prompt the correct response? Before the learner responds. Prompts are used to evoke the correct response and therefore are provided after the instruction, but before the response. Question. What type of reinforcers get their reinforcing value by being paired with other reinforcers? Conditioned reinforcers. Conditioned reinforcers are reinforcers that gain their value by being paired with other reinforcers. In other words, they're things that are not innately valuable to humans. Question. Mika is teaching her client to mond using PECs. Because her client is highly motivated for Cheez-It crackers, she uses these to teach the contingency of exchanging the picture icon to receive the crackers. Cheez-It crackers fall under which type of reinforcer? Primary. Cheez-It crackers are food and therefore fall under unconditioned or primary reinforcers. Question. Blank teaching occurs in a learner's natural environment, using naturally occurring learning opportunities. Incidental. Incidental teaching is a naturalistic teaching procedure. This is conducted in a learner's natural environment, using learning opportunities that arise naturally. Question. Which type of chaining procedure consists of prompting each step until the final step, which the learner then completes independently? Backward. A backwards chaining procedure is conducted by prompting each step of the chain until you reach the final step, which the learner completes on their own. As they master the final step, then they complete the last and second to last step, and so on. Question. You can achieve stimulus control through the process of discrimination training. In discrimination training, you reinforce a behavior in the presence of one stimulus, but not in the presence of other stimuli. Teaching learners to discriminate between stimuli is how stimulus control can be achieved. Question. Dana is teaching her client, Joey, to receptively identify body parts on himself. She provides the SD, touch your head. When Joey touches his head, she delivers verbal praise and a high five. When given this instruction and Joey touches his nose, she does not deliver praise or a high five. Dana is conducting discrimination training. This is an example of discrimination training. Dana provides reinforcement when Joey responds to the SD by touching his head, but does not provide reinforcement when Joey responds by touching his nose. Through repetitions of this, Joey learns to discriminate between the stimuli, demonstrating the behavior of touching his head only when the SD, touch your head, is present. Question. VR, FR, V, and FI are all intermittent schedules of reinforcement. Variable ratio, VR, fixed ratio, FR, variable interval, V, and fixed interval, phi, are all intermittent schedules of reinforcement. With each of these, you reinforce some, but not all, occurrences of the behavior of interest. Question. Shay is learning to label colors. Which of the following examples would exemplify naturalistic teaching to learn colors? While playing with Legos in the playroom, they build a Lego tower and the RBT asks Shay to label the color of some of the Legos. Naturalistic teaching occurs in one's natural environment and involves learning opportunities embedded in naturally occurring situations rather than contrived teaching opportunities. Playing with Legos in her playroom is a naturally occurring situation. The RBT threw in learning opportunities during this play activity, using Shay's motivation to build the tower. Question. When teaching your client to match 2D identical pictures, you start by providing a hand-over-hand prompt so that they are successful. After a few sessions of this, you fade your prompt to partial physical, then to gestural, until your client is successful matching pictures without any prompting. By fading your prompts, you are transferring stimulus control. By fading prompts out once the target skill is demonstrated consistently, you are transferring stimulus control to another stimulus. Initially, the client was only successful with Ho, but then you transferred control to the partial physical prompt, and eventually stimulus control was transferred to only the verbal SD match. Question. You lay out 3 small objects and provide the instruction, find the blank. Which of the following prompts would be the least intrusive in this example? Positional. A positional prompt would be the least intrusive in this example. Positional prompts consist of placing the correct target closer to the learner and the other items further away. This would require no physical guidance of the client. Question. Your BCBA asks you to create a task analysis for tying shoes. What does this mean? You break down the skill of tying shoes into several individual steps. A task analysis is a breakdown of a multiple-step skill. For the skill of tying shoes, a task analysis would consist of breaking it down into each individual component. For example, cross the laces, then push one lace under the other, then pull tight, and so on. Question. Providing assistance following the SD to ensure your learner responds accurately is blank prompting. Prompts or any type of assistance following are presented along with the SD to evoke the correct response. Test 3. Question. In a token economy, the items or activities the learner caches in their tokens for are called backup reinforcers. Backup reinforcers are the items and activities that the learner caches in their tokens for. Oftentimes, these items are listed on a reinforcer menu for the person to choose from. Question. You taught your client to label a refrigerator on a 2D picture card. The next day, your client's mother informs you that he has been pointing to refrigerator in their kitchen and saying, refrigerator. What does this demonstrate? Generalization. This would be generalization. The client learned the skill using one stimulus, 2D picture card, and generalized the skill with other stimuli, the actual refrigerator in their home. Question. Blank occurs when an intervention is removed, but the client continues to demonstrate the skill. Maintenance. Maintenance occurs when an individual continues to demonstrate a skill after the intervention is discontinued. Question. Derek creates a token economy for his students. He identifies the behaviors that he wants to target, chooses the tokens that will be used, and creates a backup reinforcer menu for the students to cache in their tokens for, with a specified number of tokens needed for each item. What step does he need to add before reviewing and implementing this with his students? Specifying a reinforcer schedule for the tokens. A reinforcer schedule is missing. Derek needs to specify how often his students will receive tokens. For example, is it a continuous reinforcement schedule, where they receive tokens for each occurrence of the behavior? Is it an intermittent schedule of reinforcement? If it is an INT schedule, then what type? Question. Your client is working on a multiple-step household chore. Your BCBA instructs you to teach this skill using a chaining procedure. The chore consists of 7 steps. At baseline, your learner can do 5 out of the 7 steps independently. Which type of chaining procedure would you use? Total task. A total task chaining procedure is usually best for skills that your client already knows some of the steps for. In a total task chaining procedure, you allow the learner to go through the steps and only provide prompting on the steps they need support with. This helps avoid over-prompting that could come with forward or backward chaining. Question. Manny learns to urinate using a toddler toilet at his home during therapy sessions. When he mastered this skill, his therapy team began having him use the family's toilet and, when out in the community, tried taking him to public restrooms. Manny would not urinate in any toilet other than his toddler toilet at home, exemplifying a lack of blank of this skill. Generalization. This skill was mastered and maintained in Manny's toddler toilet. However, he continued to use only that toilet, representing a lack of generalization of the skill. He did not generalize to other stimuli or locations. Question. Lynette earns stickers for following rules during therapy sessions. When she earns 10 stickers, she can choose a prize from the prize box. What type of procedure does this exemplify? Token economy. This is a token economy. The client has specified behaviors for which she earns tokens, i.e., stickers which can be cashed in for a backup reinforcer, i.e., the prize box. Question. You review a skill acquisition plan for a receptive identification of 3D objects goal, which states to provide most to least prompting. Which type of prompt would you likely start with? For most it would be HO. Most to least prompting is prompting the skill using the most intrusive prompt and fading out to less intrusive prompts. Hand over hand would be the most intrusive prompt. It is important to note that prompt levels are unique to each individual learner and, for some, HO is not preferred. Always check with your BCBA about specific prompting guidance. Question. In an FR5 schedule of reinforcement, the reinforcer would be provided every 5 occurrences of the behavior, in other words, a fixed ratio. A fixed ratio schedule is where you reinforce every X number of occurrences of the behavior. FR5 equals fixed ratio 5, so every 5 occurrences of the behavior are reinforced. Question. Sarah gives her daughter a sticker when she uses the toilet independently. Her daughter continues increasing her independence with using the toilet independently. This exemplifies blank. Positive reinforcement. While stickers are sometimes used as tokens, since there are no backup reinforcers, this would not be a token economy. This is an example of positive reinforcement. She earns something for engaging in a target behavior and the target behavior increases as a result. Question. Lola has a BIP targeting aggressions. The function of her aggressions is hypothesized to be access to attention. Which of the following would be the most appropriate replacement behavior to be included in her BIP, given this information? Teach Lola to say, "Hi person's name" to get their attention. Replacement behaviors should be included in a client's BIP. These are behaviors we teach that match the function of the individual's target behavior, so they learn more appropriate ways of meeting their needs. Since Lola engages in aggression to gain people's attention, a functionally equivalent replacement behavior could be to teach her to gain people's attention in other ways, such as saying, "Hi person's name," tapping them on the shoulder, asking them to play, etc. Question. What is an antecedent intervention? A strategy for preventing target behaviors. Antecedents occur prior to the behavior. Therefore, an antecedent intervention is a strategy for modifying the environment to prevent target behaviors from occurring. Question. Which of the following reasons for a particular behavior would not fall under the main functions of behavior? Because you wanted to. Because you wanted to does not fall under one of the 4 functions of behavior. To get someone to play with you would fall under the function of attention. Because it felt good would fall under the automatic reinforcement function, and to avoid an unpleasant situation would fall under escape avoidance. Question. Which of the following scenarios constitutes the need for a crisis intervention to be included in your learner's behavior reduction plan? Your learner engages in attempted elopements from the home. Crisis interventions should be in place for behaviors that are potentially harmful to the individual or others, or situations that involve a client's health and wellness, e.g., client experiences seizures. Echolalia and high-pitched screams do not warrant crisis interventions, as they are not likely to cause harm. Attempting to elope from the home would warrant a crisis intervention plan, as the client could potentially experience harm, getting lost, darting into traffic, etc. Question. A discriminative stimulus indicates the availability of reinforcement. A discriminative stimulus, SD, is commonly thought of as an instruction. Technically, however, it is a stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement based on a learning history. Question. You are starting with a new client who engages in several dangerous behaviors. Where can you locate the procedures for how to prevent and respond to these behaviors? Behavior Reduction Plan. A behavior reduction plan, also known as a behavior intervention plan (BIP), will hold individualized strategies for each client, outlining target behaviors as well as how to prevent and respond to them. Question. Stimulus changes in the environment that occur right before a behavior are referred to as blank. Antecedents. Antecedents are changes in the environment which occur right before a behavior. Question. The functions of behavior include automatic reinforcement, access to tangibles, escape, attention eats escape, attention. Tangible and sensory. The four functions of behavior are automatic reinforcement, access to tangibles, escape, and attention. Question. You have had a migraine all day long. You try to relax, but it doesn't go away. You finally give in and take an Excedrin. What is most likely the function of your behavior of taking an Excedrin? Escape, to get out of having a headache. You are likely engaging in the behavior of taking an Excedrin to escape your migraine. Therefore, escape is the function of your behavior. Question. Penelope gets overstimulated in loud settings and begins screaming and running away, which can be dangerous because she does not have safety awareness. Choose the most appropriate antecedent intervention to support Penelope. Provide access to noise-reducing headphones before entering a potentially loud setting. Providing noise-reducing headphones would be an appropriate antecedent intervention for Penelope. Never going into public is not realistic, nor does it support client dignity. Ignoring and blocking access are consequent strategies, as they occur after the behavior occurs. Teaching Penelope to moan for a break would be a replacement behavior. Test 4. Question. Stimulus changes that occur right after a behavior are referred to as consequences. Consequences are stimulus changes that occur right after a behavior. Question. Kevin hits his peers at preschool to get their attention. His team implements a procedure where everyone limits attention toward Kevin when he hits his peers. Instead, he receives verbal praise when engaging in behaviors that keep his hands busy. Clapping, playing with Legos, etc. What type of procedure does this entail? Differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. This is a differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors (DRI). A. DRI combines extinction and reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. An incompatible behavior is one that you cannot physically do at the same time as the target behavior. In this scenario, Kevin cannot hit others while he's occupying his hands to clap or play with Legos. Therefore, he receives reinforcement when he's engaged in these incompatible behaviors. Question. When using extinction, you withhold reinforcement for a behavior that was previously reinforced. Extinction is a process of withholding reinforcement for previously reinforced behaviors. It is not simply ignoring behaviors. The exact extinction method will depend on what maintains the behavior, i.e., the function. Question. Which of the following variables would not be necessary to communicate with your BCBA immediately? Your client mastered one of their programs. Always communicate anything that may affect your client's treatment to your BCBA as soon as possible. Your BCBA will need to know when the client is ill and sessions are canceled, ended early, when caregivers report concerns, and when new medications are started. The client mastering a program does not need to be urgently communicated. Your BCBA will review goals at their next overlap and should see that the goal was mastered at that time. Question. In a DRO, you reinforce all behaviors other than the behavior targeted for reduction. DRO stands for differential reinforcement of other behaviors. In this procedure, you withhold reinforcement for the target behavior and provide reinforcement for all other behaviors, typically on an interval schedule. Question. Your client's parent tells you to run a program differently than how your BCBA originally trained you. How should you proceed? Agree as long as their request is not likely to result in harm and immediately seek guidance from your BCBA after the session. Unless the request is likely to cause harm, e.g., they request you implement a punishment procedure, you would most likely follow their request in the moment and then immediately seek guidance after the session. If you're able to get into contact with your BCBA during the session, you could try that, but generally, you would avoid the conflict and allow your BCBA to handle the situation after the fact. Question. Henry had a particularly challenging session with his new client, Mia. After the session, he reaches out to his BCBA to request guidance. He sends her a secure message on their HIPAA compliant communication platform. Choose the most appropriate way for Henry to communicate these concerns. Answer. Nia engaged in 27 aggressions and 12 SIBs today, which was significantly higher than I observed during training. I follow the BIP, but I am unsure whether I'm doing things correctly. Could you overlap my next session to provide guidance? The correct wording describes the concerns in observable and measurable terms, specifying exactly what happened and what Henry needs from his supervisor. Question. Pam is working with a 7-year-old client named Lincoln. Lincoln engages in behaviors to escape non-preferred work tasks. How might Pam use a draw to reduce Lincoln's escape behaviors? Choose the best solution given this scenario. Answer. Allow Lincoln to escape non-preferred tasks by demanding for a break. In a draw procedure, you provide reinforcement when they demonstrate an alternative, more appropriate way of getting their needs met. Lincoln is seeking to escape non-preferred tasks, so a draw would consist of reinforcing more appropriate ways of escaping non-preferred tasks, such as demanding for a break. Question. Which of the following is the most objective statement for a session note? Correct response is client demonstrated low rates of attention today. Prompts were needed for all goals due to inattention, resulting in 0% independent responding. This wording is the most objective and would be appropriate to write in a session note. It is based on observable facts, objective, and is measurable. Struggled to attend is quite subjective. Using terms like struggled with or didn't do well with should be avoided and swapped for more objective terminology. Question. Which of the following scenarios would constitute a mandated reporting situation? Correct response is you observe your client's mother throw her against a wall in response to the client engaging in aggressive behavior. Physical abuse is one of the reasons a mandated reporter, which RBTs and BCBAs would need to contact CPS DCF. Giving one's child caffeine and not having access to toys do not constitute abuse or neglect. Question. Client documentation is required to be saved for a minimum of blank years. The correct answer is 7 years. Client documentation needs to be saved for 7 years or longer if required by local state laws. Question. Your client has sessions in 2 locations. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, they have sessions at home. On Tuesdays and Fridays, they have sessions in the clinic. How could you transport your client's session notes and data sheets from their home to the clinic? Choose the best possible response. Correct answer is in a locked box in your trunk. While RBTs often are not responsible for transporting client documentation, there may be some exceptions, such as that laid out in this scenario where the client has sessions in more than one location. The most secure location for client documentation, when it needs to be transported, is in a locked box in a locked trunk. A locked trunk without a locked box is also typically acceptable, though a locked box is preferred. Question. Which of the following most closely represents the role of the RBT in the ABA service delivery? The role is to work one or in groups, implementing treatment and behavior goals as created by the BCBA. RBTs are primarily responsible for implementing treatment and behavior goals as written by the BCBA. RBTs are not responsible for assessing, diagnosing, or creating interventions. Question. How often is it necessary to take the RBT competency assessment? It's required once per year. The RBT competency assessment must be completed before the exam, then again on an annual basis. The assessment is necessary each year before you are able to renew your credential. Question. Your supervisor provides you constructive feedback on how you implemented a demanding goal. You are confused, as another supervisor previously trained you to do it this way. Choose the best way for you to respond to this feedback. The correct response would be to say, "Thanks for the feedback. Could you provide additional clarification, as another supervisor originally trained me to do it this way?" The best way to respond is to respectfully ask for clarification. Having supervisors who provide conflicting instructions and feedback can be confusing, and it's important to gain clarity so you know exactly what to do moving forward. However, you never want to argue or get into a debate when provided with feedback. It's possible that your current supervisor is simply doing things differently than your previous supervisor, likely based on finding this way to be more effective. You may also have been trained in one method with another client, but every client's programs are unique, even if they have similar goals, so the way they are implemented will likely vary. Question: which of the following situations does not constitute a dual relationship? You provide therapy at a client's home and in the community, e.g., the grocery store, the park. Providing therapy in multiple locations does not constitute a dual relationship. We often work with clients in the community to generalize essential skills when they have mastered them in their home or other settings. Babysitting for a client's family. Having a personal relationship with the family, i.e., the dad being friends with your husband and being social media friends, all constitute dual relationships and must be avoided when working as an RBT. Question: your client's dad asks if you have ever worked with a client on teaching them to tie their shoes. You tell him you have worked on this skill with 2 other clients. He asks you to teach his son as well. How should you respond? The correct response would be to tell him you'll let the case supervisor know he's interested in targeting shoe tying and wait until a goal is in place before targeting the skill. RBTs should only target skills with a formal goal and a program designed by the BCBA or case supervisor in place. When a parent or caregiver asks you to implement or modify a goal, always inform your supervisor of their request and let them know you will forward their request to the supervisor. It should also be noted that the final option is not appropriate, as this type of response would be out of an RBT's scope. Allow your supervisor to assess the client's skills to determine whether or not the requested skill is appropriate to work on. Question: you work 1 with client A 12 hours per week and with client B 8 hours per week. What is the minimum number of hours of supervision you must receive each month?
4.
The minimum time is 4 hours a month. RBTs must have ongoing supervision for 5% of their direct hours. If you work 20 hours per week, 5% is 1 hour per week, so at least 4 hours per month must be supervised. Keep in mind that this is the bare minimum. It is not uncommon to receive a greater number of supervised hours. Question: which of the following would not need to be documented in a daily session note? The behavior intervention plan procedures. Each company and funder may have different requirements for session notes, but generally speaking, you should include the date and time, who else was present, e.g., caregivers, BCBA, other technicians overlapping and maladaptive, or interfering behaviors, e.g., elopement, aggression, SIB. You would not need to write out complete procedures, such as the BIP. However, you might include information such as, client engaged in ABC behaviors. RBT followed BIP, doing XYZ. Question: which of the following is a setting event that could impact your client's response to treatment? Your client is reported to be ill, with a cough and runny nose. Your client feeling ill is a setting event that could affect the session. The other possible responses align more as being antecedents rather than setting events.